Sounds great to me.
All right, perfect. So, guys, everyone, welcome to Gauss Fireside Chat. It is August 22nd, 2022, and we have some amazing guests, info, and maybe a little bit of alpha today. If you have been on the other AMAs and Fireside Chats, my name is Alex, and I'll be helping out with moderating this AMA and this Fireside Chat, and I'll be helping to organize some of the questions as well. If you have any questions or anything you would like to ask the guests, sorry about that, please leave them in the stage Q&A section and we will try to get through all of them at the end of this discussion period. This Fireside Chat is being recorded and it'll be uploaded on our YouTube channel after it is done. So today's discussion is about KYB, vetting, and accountability in crypto. So we're gonna start off with some introductions, starting with Tyler? I hopefully I said your name right. Taylor,
Like
right.
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift. Okay, I'll get that right next time. So we have Taylor, Arsh, and Zach as well. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Taylor. Taylor Funk, he's from Obsidian, and he is one of the core members that built out and runs Verified by Obsidian, Enterprise by Obsidian, and Investigations by Obsidian. So hello, Taylor, and feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, you guys. I'm happy to have the opportunity to speak about KYB vetting and accountability, as it's something that is very pertinent and important for the crypto space as a whole. I'm sure that, especially given some recent events, that it's definitely on the forefront of my mind and something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And excited to talk to you more about my perspective on these topics.
Perfect. Thank you for that, and I totally agree with you. So next up, we have Arsh, and Arsh is from 100 Day Ventures. Hopefully I'm saying your name correct. Arsh is the CEO of 100 Day Ventures, and he is also one of the founders. So hello, Arsh. Welcome to Gauss, and feel free to introduce yourself.
Thank you guys so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. So for us, as 100 Days is kind of a blockchain-based DeFi ecosystem powered by our Astro token. Our project is focused on the core principles of integrating companies into the blockchain technologies. This year, we're kind of focused on real estate, gaming, and sports in particular. But I think is everything that we are speaking on here today is kind of, especially in the forefront of everything kind of going on from a DeFi perspective today. These are just mission critical topics. So kind of excited to dive in and speak with you all about it.
Thank you. Can't wait to have this conversation. And last but not least, we have Zach Medin. I think that's his last name. I think I'm butchering it. But he's from Cardinal House, and Zach is one of the co-founders of Cardinal, and he is in charge of operations, partnerships, and he oversees day-to-day operations at Cardinal. So welcome, Zach, and feel free to introduce yourself too.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And at Cardinal House, like at our core, we're really a community focused on education, hosting entertaining events, and really just bringing a more positive atmosphere to the DeFi space.
Perfect. And thank you. And I think everyone does have a Discord channel, so we'll leave the links below later on. But thank you everyone for being here, and I'm just going to give it away to Gary to start off the discussion.
Yeah, thanks for the intros, Alex. And thank you all for, coming to have this conversation. I think these conversations are important to have for all of our communities and the crypto space in general. The last one we had was on, crypto law and regulations, and this kind of dovetails into that conversation. And I guess to get it out of the way early, Taylor, we could discuss what happened with Liquid Capital. Before we do, I want to say you guys have been handling that phenomenally well.
Thank you, sir.
But yeah, like from that perspective, what's happening with them and why that's important for somebody to be in position to hold projects accountable for the safety of their spaces. Like, what do you want to comment on with that one?
Yeah, it's a good question. And obviously, because it's so fresh, I was definitely expecting to talk about this. Yeah. I can tell you, just to preface all my comments, everything that I will talk about is stuff that's already publicly known. If there's any questions about stuff that we haven't released publicly yet, I will not be able to speak on it until we do so. Just so you're aware. Not that I'm trying to hold any secrets right now. It's just making sure that I'm being careful with the entire situation. Make sure we have all of our ducks in a row.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that level of professionalism and business etiquette, certainly.
Awesome. So the question is, can you clarify the question one more time for me?
Just with what happened in handling it, like, why is this so important? I mean, obviously, I have my opinions and strongly support this, but from your perspective, why is it that, this sort of KYB process, I'm glad to hear you use that term, by the way. Glad it's catching on.
Yeah, you're welcome.
But why it's so but why it's so important for the crypto space from your perspective?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about the crypto industry as a whole is we are dealing with a high level of anonymity, which is the norm. It's the status quo, and I don't personally have any qualms with that in terms of my opinion on it. I think that it's great and it makes a lot of sense given what the crypto space is about at this point in time, and the importance that the role of privacy plays in the entire space. Right? It is abnormal to be known. Right? In the same way that you or I, Gary, or Arsh, we have our faces as our profile pictures. We're in a world where that level of transparency is uncommon. And so from my perspective, when it comes to actually developing trust in any capacity, it requires some sort of relationship and reliance on the individual that you are building a relationship with. And given that there's that lack of the human element of knowing who someone is, knowing what their face looks like, their true identity, it's important for a middleman or an intermediary, a third party, to step in and to be able to bridge that trust gap between those that desire to keep their personal information private and are building a project, and those that are looking to fund that project but want to make sure that they aren't left vulnerable to the high level of fraud that occurs in the space for the same reason that privacy is so important. Under the guise of privacy, fraud occurs so incredibly often. And so with that risk being as present as it is with KYB, right, know your business, it's important to make sure that that third party that steps in to bridge that trust gap, first of all, that their process is thorough enough to make sure that they can stem any potential backdoors or exploits that have been known previously in order to bait and switch those that don't have the experience of being rugged or are not as careful with those that they trust their money with. So making sure that the process is thorough is very important from the actual KYC company, because it's kind of like saying that all food is the same, right? Like, that's obviously not true. There's different types of food, there's different flavors, there's different ingredients, and to create a dish in that same line of thought, there's so many different ways to perform a KYC. So, sorry, this is such a long-winded answer. I'll try and tie this up. This is a hard question to answer. Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. I've got a lot of thoughts on it. But the point is, the reason why it's important is because in the event that the anonymous crypto team in who you are trusting to fulfill on the promises that they are making, if they are to go back on those promises, and if they were putting up these promises as a guise to get you to give them your money so that they can eventually run away, you want someone to have the ability to hold that crypto team accountable in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, it's meaningless. It's good. It's good for nothing.
Right.
So on that front as well, the reason why KYB is important, I actually have recently started referring to it as identity management, which is a whole other thing, right? There's different ways to describe it, but you want to make sure that that third party can actually hold individuals accountable so that they are not incentivized, so they're disincentivized to do it again, right? If they believe that they have a high chance of being held accountable for their fraud, for their theft, they are going to either think twice, or there's going to be less of a chance that they will move forward with acting in a manner that would get them in prison in the real world. Hopefully that was not too complicated of an answer to your fairly simple question.
Well, no, and it's really not a simple question, though, is it? This whole space is all about decentralization and anonymity and giving individuals more power over their digital identity, ownership of digital assets. Like, that's kind of all in the orbit of this whole space.
Right.
But I think for mass adoption to happen, for it to occur, for brands to hop into this space with both feet, not just sticking their toes in the water to test it out, this is the sort of thing that needs to happen. I think, Kevin O'Leary is a huge supporter of regulation. And to some degree, I don't disagree with some regulation, right? Common sense regulation. But I think we can do a lot, the projects in this space, to hold one another accountable. Like, that's part of what we're building with our whole ecosystem. And to segue over to Arsh, I believe that's part of what 100 Days wants to work on as well, is onboarding real brands with real use cases into this space. And for smaller brands or smaller projects to have them also go through a vetting process as well, similar to what we're kind of building with Gauss. So Arsh, do you want to talk about your perspective on how this is important to, brands and mass adoption?
Absolutely, and I think it kind of, and Taylor, I think, spoke on this very well. It's the aspect of, if you are launching a project and you are trying to get any sort of funding or anything like that, if people are investing in you, they're believing in you and your vision and everything that you're doing. You're developing a relationship with them, a rapport. But when it's the aspect of, like, you're hiding behind a profile photo, and again, as Taylor said, it's like there are certain situations where you can understand where that individual is coming from. But in the aspect of, like, for us as 100 Days, when we're trying to be that bridge between real world companies and blockchain, it's like, if you are not publicly doxed, I mean, the mission that we're trying to accomplish would simply be impossible in my mind. And from a brand's perspective, everyone that we're talking to, it's the aspect of, that's what people fear, is the aspect of crypto's bad rap because of the aspect of there being no regulations. I think there's always that fine line in between. But that's what brands are kind of weary of. Everyone that we talk to, anyone that's scared, it's the aspect of kind of going into the un-KYC'd world of kind of the aspect of, you don't know your users and you don't know your customers, but also there's a lot of rug pulls, there's a lot of bad things that happen. But also from a regulation standpoint, kind of the lack of regulation is the second caveat that has companies scared. And in my experience, at least, it kind of always articulates back to those two core points.
Yeah, I agree. It's frustrating to watch what's happened over the last, 11 years now, and how so many people still view it as the Wild West, right? Scams still happen every single day in the space. And a lot of what, we're all building for this is necessary to get those large brands in and to get the billions of potential users into this space. So before going on further, I want to say, again, thank you guys for all being here and for building what you're building. I don't view this as a zero-sum endeavor, and I think there's opportunities to work together, and I think we're all working toward similar goals in, different but also similar ways. And I think that's all important, Before we go on, we keep saying KYB and KYC, and for listeners who don't understand what that is, KYC is know your customer. It's a concept that's been used in the digital space for a long time. There's a bunch of laws and regs around it that all deal with AML, which is anti-money laundering and stuff like that. I've been pushing the acronym KYB, Know Your Business, because I think there needs to be a delineation between know your customer as being the end user aspect and know your business being knowing the team behind it, or at least having somebody as the gateholder, as Taylor said, the identity managers for that. So that's what that is. And I think auditing is another part of this whole thing, right? A lot of projects are audited. That's becoming fairly standard. And I think the public largely expects everyone to be audited at this point. That is, their smart contracts going through some manner of review service. And Zach, I know you guys are working on an auditing service. I was wondering what other products Cardinal House is working on in this, accountability space.
Yeah. So the main one would be the auditing service, and audits are very important because it's another set of eyes looking over code to verify that there's no malicious code, bugs are all patched, the contract is tested. One single set of eyes, especially the person developing it, might easily overlook that, or there's a lot of new developers coming in the space. I mean, Solidity is relatively a new programming language. People, especially if they're launching a project for the first time, they've never used Solidity before. Like, there's some common mistakes that people might make. So having that second set of eyes, like I said, super crucial, and it really just helps that investor security. But also, on the other hand, like audits also point out a lot of vectors that they could pull the liquidity or sell a bunch of tokens or do something malicious with that. And going into a project and at least having those laid out in front of you as an investor are really helpful, because you're at least presented the risks. Like, this is exactly how they're able to do something malicious with the information that they have, because most contracts actually do have something that you could do technically on the back end, whether that's like a secret minting function, or team tokens getting unlocked, or the liquidity is not locked, or I don't know. There's usually a dozen different things that could be used in a malicious way, but that's kind of sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there's, I'm actually a fan of upgradable or proxy contract sets, and that whole process is something that allows for bad actors to act bad, right? They could take advantage of that aspect of being able to just swap out an entire smart contract functionally with an upgradable contract set, which I think is why all of these parts are important. The, KYB and vetting processes, the auditing services, and then kind of what Arsh and Gauss are working on in different ways, or 100 Days and Gauss are working on in different ways, is the initial gating of those, various projects and teams and whatnot. So I think all of this is so important in this space. I think we'll end up seeing a lot more in regulation. And I kind of want all of your feedback on this really dumb piece of regulation that's kind of tangential to what we're talking about. But I'm throwing up air quotes here, the investor word. For Gauss, it's a bad word. We don't say, investors or investments here with Gauss. It's buyers, purchasers, sales, that sort of thing. That's a legal and regulatory semantics issue. But what are your takes on something like that? Don't want to go too deep into the weeds on this tangent, but I'm curious.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because like you said, it's really just wording at that point, calling somebody an investor or a participant or a purchaser. I mean, they're really the same thing, but from a regulatory standpoint, it's completely different, and you can get in trouble for calling people investors. Like, if I advertise Gauss as an investment or Cardinal token as an investment, then I can get in legal trouble, and it's deemed a security right off the bat, rather than me saying like, oh, hey, you want to participate in my pre-sale or something like that. Like, that's a different ballpark. it's weird like that. Once you set rules in place, then that is almost like saying, okay, here's the rules. Here's exactly what you can do to get around them too. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a complicated discussion for sure.
Were you going to say something, Marsh? I'm sorry.
I think that Zach nailed it. It's the aspect of, because we know exactly what is allowed and what isn't allowed, it kind of clears the line of kind of how to skirt around it. And I think Zach nailed that point.
Right.
Yeah, one thought that I had, and this was more principle based, which is, I think with all law, there's a difference between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And oftentimes you get the arguments of skirting around the actual law itself, of the semantics of the law when it's the letter of the law, when you're focusing on the specific verbiage, and well, it's not a 3-syllable word, it's a 4-syllable word, therefore we're clear, that kind of stuff, where in reality the principle is the same. And that's the hard part with any type of law, is how can you enforce the spirit of it, or how do you not lose the spirit of it in the process of creating the letter of it. And it's a very tough line that I think all regulators have to walk. But unfortunately, It's not as easy as 1, 2, 3. This is how you communicate that. So those are my thoughts on the question.
And I think part of the reason I wanted to touch on this is because I think for those who are doing things right, there's this whole process we have to navigate. I'm all for every bit of accountability, but in doing all of that, you still have to weave through this regulatory minefield, as it were, of us not referring to our purchasers as investors or their purchases as investments, and a whole slew of other things like that I think is some other area that we can all benefit the other projects that we're working with in that aspect. That's part of the reason, our first one of these fireside chats was with 4 great attorneys, and that was the topic, because I think a lot of this needs to be spoken about more and openly, right? Like for Gauss, a lot of people have looked at our NFT sale and ask why. Well, one of the largest reasons is that it works around those regulations, right? It's not an initial token sale or any of those acronyms, ICO, IEO, whatever. It's its own NFT. It has an immediate use because the ecosystem's not in existence yet. And I think that that's another aspect that we're going to watch continue to evolve, and that projects like ours get to be leaders in this space to help others navigate as well. So we didn't really talk much about it, Taylor, but the liquid capital thing, and I'm not gonna beat this dead horse. I know you are tired of it, I'm sure.
Well, everyone else is curious, so I don't blame you.
Right. Well, I was, cursor. They were in my periphery. I think I'd talked to a couple different people about liquid capital before it happened. I think I have a fair idea of what happened, but you're in the trenches of that situation and dealing with the core team and resolving that sort of, what's happening with those funds. That's really part of the question to the communities want to know. So what is your perspective on the right way to do that, which I believe you guys are doing, and the wrong way of holding projects accountable? Because I think that's an important part of this whole conversation too, that there's a right way to do all this and there's a wrong way, which is why I'm really a big fan of Obsidian.
Wow, first of all, I appreciate that, but I want to make sure that I understand your question, because it's a lot to break down. In that, again, I'd probably be talking the rest of this conversation. I definitely don't want to overpower it the whole time. So when you say the right way versus the wrong way, are you specifically referring to how refunds are done? Are you referring to our involvement in the situation? Can you clarify that aspect of the right versus the wrong way for me?
Yeah. Sorry if my dogs lit up anyone's earbuds or something. But I believe there is a right way and a wrong way of handling the process of holding projects accountable.
Okay.
The question there is, what do you believe are some aspects of each, I suppose?
Of holding a project accountable. What is the right way to hold a project accountable?
Yeah, I mean, I
Well,
think.
sorry.
Do you agree that there are aspects of a right way and aspects of a wrong way?
Well, of course, I guess a better way to answer this question would be right off the bat, what is the wrong way, right? Like, what shouldn't we do? And I think one of the wrong ways to go about it would be to incite some sort of public frenzy that would cause the masses to become ravenous and cry out for blood, and like somehow incite that type of behavior and put the team in danger. That I'd say that's definitely the wrong way, although it can be classified as technically holding someone accountable, right? I would say, and that's something that I'm very conscious of as we get involved in these types of situations, and specifically referring to liquid capital. Like, I am genuinely concerned for the safety of the people that I'm speaking with on a day-to-day basis, because I get to hear from them what it's like to have their wife or their sister or their dad or their brother receive death threats through their social media accounts from all of these randos on the internet, and just how terrifying that would be as a human being. I hate the thought of that, and
Right.
Sorry.
No, I was agreeing with you, just saying right.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think that because there's been so much taking advantage of communities as a whole that I've seen just over the course of this year with Obsidian, that it's almost become a learned behavior on the knee-jerk reaction, the knee-jerk, I'm going to rip your heart out if you take this money from me, so that they can, in that way, a community as a whole can hold the project owners or the core team members accountable, however you'd like to describe them. So from my side, with that being said, I would say the right way to go about it is by building processes and systems that allow you to legally be involved, that ensure that there is some sort of legal recourse, that will some sort of legal recourse that we can either A, assist the community in taking advantage of, or B, pursue on our side if we deem necessary. But the whole goal would be to do it in a way that can still solve the problem of doling out consequences without burning people at the stake. Would you say that answers your question?
Yeah, it does, definitely. I think it even provides a nice segue. You and I have had some of these conversations and spoken about some of these topics before. And it's something, I'm not saying that, we're looking forward to having this fight, right, within our ecosystem or within any projects that do have some sort of negative aspect like this. But I am looking forward to being in position to hold them accountable as a layer one blockchain. I don't think there's any other out there that is capable or willing to do so. And I think, again, that there's an important difference. Like, Ethereum needs to exist. That area of privacy, decentralization, and everything needs to exist. But I think that this also needs to exist, that our ecosystem needs to exist, that projects like Obsidian, 100 Days, Cardinal, all of these need to exist. Sorry, my dogs are going off in the background. There might be a wind outside. But to segue into this, Arsh, part of what we're going to be developing is a process for onboarding into our ecosystem And that looks like, an initial step, a very coarse sieve to help separate the wheat from the chaff, the good projects from the bad. And I imagine that internally, 100 Days is doing similar at the top level. So can you talk about your process, or to some degree, whatever you're willing to disclose publicly, what you use as deciding factors of which projects 100 Days wants to work with, how that looks for somebody applying to partner with 100 Days?
Absolutely. And this is an interesting topic for us because thus far, all of our partnerships, whether it was the F1 partnership or the real estate or sports damage, or anything like that, all those partnerships thus far had been from our network. There was no external recruitment or anything like that. It was kind of the basis of us opening to 100 Days was these different companies were looking to get in and looking to use us as that vehicle. But now, as we've kind of been in the space for a little bit, just this week we had 2 companies that wanted to onboard through us and kind of go through our processes. So it's kind of the aspect of you don't want to trade it alongside as you're going through it, but it's the aspect of you can only kind of plan and foresee so much of that aspect. And for us, the things that we're looking at is, number one is obviously these are traditional companies, so doxing is not an issue, but sometimes the protocol is. Because a lot of these companies see crypto as an easy way to kind of raise some capital funds and kind of go back and kind of develop whatever they're looking to. And they look at the difference between Web 2 and Web 3 is Web 2, you have to establish your product and then get funding, versus in Web 3, you'll see us go ahead and grab funding and then go back to that build phase. But it's kind of the aspect, and that's kind of our cornerstone right now, has been working with companies they're all right with kind of raising funds to accomplish a goal, but making that goal is accomplishable and tangible, and the aspect of that this is something that'll come out in the next couple months that's a real protocol, a real project-based solution, rather than this kind of arbitrary thing 2 years down the line, which we kind of ran into and had to say no a few times to.
Right. And I think you made another important, differentiation here between established brands, right? Like the KYB vetting process for a Nike, it doesn't exist. We're not, doing KYB on the CEO of Nike. That's not happening. But a lot of these new projects, that's more what we're talking about, smaller teams, newer projects, not established multi-billion or million-dollar brands. And I think it'll be interesting to watch them join this space. And I'm going to put you on the spot here for a second, Arsh. What do you think the chance of, we've spoken a little bit, and this isn't the alpha, but what do you think are the chances of, 100 Days working with us to onboard some of those projects into our ecosystem once we're more established and it makes sense for your potential partners or clients as well?
See, to me, at the end of the day, when we're kind of assessing anything like this, it comes down to the core thing is it providing value to both sides? So that's what a partnership is about at the end of the day. And to me, it's if that statement is clear and that answer is yes, then to me, it's not a question of why, because that is the why to me. So from our aspect is whenever those relationships lie and it makes sense for both parties involved, I can't wait to make it happen.
Yeah, likewise. Like I said, again, we've spoken a couple times already, but I'm really looking forward to that as well. And that's part of how we're going to end up building our network is with a lot of, affiliate relationships or partnerships. We're going to be working with marketing and talent agencies to onboard a lot of their, clients into our ecosystem. And same thing that you had with your warm leads. That's another aspect that we're doing. I think it's one of the smartest go-to-market strategies, especially, for anyone with large established networks. I didn't know that about 100 Days, that's where your initial partnerships came from. That's interesting.
Totally. For us, is the aspect of why not kind of run through our needs and kind of our network and everything that we've done through our ventures, and from there kind of organically go as to wherever the path follows.
Right. And anyone could chime in on this one, but it's another aspect of, in my opinion, doing things right in this space, because we've all seen a lot of degen behavior, right, from the projects themselves or the people behind the projects. But I think there's a really important aspect of the space maturing that, these projects handle announcements and hype generation and things like that more maturely, in a more professional fashion. It's part of the reason we don't publicly disclose any of our potential partners. And I imagine that you guys have similar, like you just said, you were speaking to 2 other businesses or brands, but you haven't said what sector they are. You haven't hinted what businesses they are. And I think that that's another aspect of accountability that we can all agree on is, solid in this space, that we need to see more of in this space.
Yeah, I totally agree. It comes down to the aspect of like crypto is so much narration, and I think that there's positives to that and negative, but at its core, it's kind of how do you navigate the narration? And the aspect is in crypto, a lot of the times you see it be a hype narration, because in a bull market that works, and it works extremely well. But it comes down to, is that quote unquote the right thing to do? And kind of with us trying to really solve a real world problem, is that the angle to take?
Right. You were going to say something, Taylor?
Yeah, I was going to add on to that because it's a really good point, and I feel strongly about it that when it comes to the crypto industry, from what I've seen, I really like what you said about accountability and hype, right? When a project is looking to build, to start their marketing campaign, to think twice about giving statements or to making promises that they can't fulfill on or aren't exactly what they say. I have a background in door-to-door sales, and for me, I learned very quickly early on that if I wanted to actually maintain the accounts that I would sell, because for me, my pay was based off of if those were sold, but then they had to be serviced as well, right? And they had to be serviced over almost a year period. The accounts that I was able to sell that would stick for that year period were accounts that I made an effort to underpromise, to set the expectations slightly less than what I knew they were going to receive, so that when they received that thing and the little bit extra that they weren't expecting, they were happy, right? And the opposite was true, was when I would promise them the world, if I delivered the world, they were not overjoyed. They would not have been as happy as the individual that I promised less to the world and then had given the world. And I think that's an important part of relationships and building trust and just that interpersonal dynamic that works for us as humans and in business, which is we need to be careful with the things that we say and the things that we do. And in this space, I think that responsibility around making massive promises that are super hard to fulfill on, it may seem like a really good idea short term, but it's a much better long-term play if you keep it a little bit cool, right? If you don't throw all your cards on the table at once, so that you can please the people that are a part of your community. So that's all I want to say on that front.
Right. Yeah. It's about playing chess, not checkers. Right. I'm a huge fan of underpromise and overdeliver. It's part of why we have our Q4 launch window. It's part of why we vaguely talk about our networks, but haven't mentioned any names. If we said some of the names, and I think you've heard some of them, and I think Arsh has as well. I don't know if I've had the conversation with Zach, because I like having our, behind the scenes conversations where I do get to talk about this, knowing that those conversations are in confidence, but that's, in my opinion, a responsible way of doing it. I don't expect anyone's going to leak information, and whenever information's told to me in conversations, like when Sim showed me their whole giant roadmap a couple months ago, all of that, I think that that's fine in this ecosystem of projects. I think that's healthy, even because we get to hype each other up in a responsible way. Zach, and before I continue, Zach, real quick, you're, I believe, the youngest one on the call, and I want to applaud you as well for what you're doing with Cardinal House. I don't think most people understand what it takes to be a project founder, a project leader, and especially to do things right. And from what I've seen of Cardinal House, you guys are doing a lot of it in what I would consider the right way, in a very responsible manner. And to see something like that from somebody so young, I mean, to be frank, I think I'm twice your age. I think it's remarkable, right? Like, it gives me so much hope for the future to see Gen Z like stepping up and stepping into this with such like solid fervor, the ones who are doing it right. So kudos to you and the Cardinal team on that front. But did you have something to add to that topic? What's that, Taylor?
I was just giving him kudos.
Oh,
Yeah, I appreciate that, guys. Like that genuinely really means a lot to me, and the rest of the team at Cardinal House. Like, I'm just one of, I think, 6 core team members now. Shout out to Austin and Kurt; they're in the chat too. And I mean, the dynamic between the team is just so incredible, and I couldn't be where we're at today without any of them. So a huge shout out to them as well. But adding on to what Taylor said, as far as keeping people accountable for what they're saying too, because false advertising in the space is a huge issue. Like, for example, with Liquid Capital, one of their big selling points was the LMS system, and then when they go and shut it off out of nowhere, like, they state in their white paper they're going to have this LMS system that in theory should be like quote unquote law for their project, is what's written in their white paper, and then when they go against that, they should be held accountable for that. And I think that should be a little more clear. Like, for example, we are currently going through a KYC process. I had a call with Cyril, our KYC agent, yesterday, and one of the things that he had us do was, you're going to write out the core aspects and core mechanics of your token, and I'm going to hold you accountable to this. And if you do anything against this without notifying the community within 7 days of advance, then you will get in trouble, and I will have to hold you accountable for that. Do you understand that? And I said, of course I do. That definitely makes sense. I'm completely on board with that. And I think that's something, adding on to that accountability aspect is that's just very, very important too. Like, rugging is one thing, false advertising is a completely other thing that I think often just gets overlooked.
agreed. Anyone else wanted to chime in on that topic before we?
I would add on what Zach just said about making sure to hold people accountable to what they say, and figuring out the best way to do that, because the reality of the situation I believe that we're in is we are, in so many ways, and I'll compare this to when computers came out, and like, I'm talking when there was vacuum tubes and they were like the size of buildings, and bugs in the code or in the computer were literal ants inside the tubes, right? From my perspective, that's where I believe that we are at in terms of the actual development of the KYC industry and account. I guess the whole idea of holding projects accountable for the crypto space as a whole. I mean, the invention, the idea itself does absolutely fix a problem, but it fixes a problem if it's done in a way that keeps up with the circumstances of the time, right? So a computer from the 60s is about as good as zilch now, given I'm talking to you guys here on my iPhone, but that's because it's had so much time and so many iterations to develop over decades, right? And I'm not implying that it's going to take us decades to refine the KYC process and the intricacies of onboarding a new project, but I can say that it is an iterative process. Oftentimes, and this goes for anything, this goes for Gauss, this goes for 100 Days, this goes for Cardinal House, you don't know what you don't know, right? And that's a Captain Obvious statement. But you learn things oftentimes through experience. And fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, shame on me, right? And that's where we as individuals that have the ability to iterate on these existing processes need to also be accountable to actually putting into place these updated policies and procedures when we see that there's a better way to do it, when there's a better way to hold someone accountable. And that from the beginning has been our perspective and approach to the entire KYC process. And we've learned a massive amount along the way. And we've learned a ton even in this over this last week. I was just on the call at a couple hours ago with our legal counsel, telling them of all of the changes that we're making to our existing contracts. And one thing that I would say on that front is, even in this specific liquid capital situation, for anyone that's curious, the reason why we've been able to be as involved as we have been is because we learned several months ago that it's important to put into our contract to make sure that projects that are verified projects understand that as a part of their shutdown procedure, they are required to consult with us. And that's specifically in response to an experience we had where we weren't being consulted with, and the projects that we were KYCing were shutting down without our involvement, and stuff was going haywire, right? And so we made that change to be able to get involved so that we could avoid that type of situation in the future. And that's what I believe allowed us, one of the big reasons that we've been able to be involved in the situation, and to give the liquid capital plane as soft of a landing as possible, given the intense week that we just had. So that's the only thought I wanted to share on that point.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we view this whole space as an evolution. We need to be able to evolve with it. The only thing that really needs to be immutable is the blockchain itself, right? Not our processes, not the rest of the software and architecture that we're building with. And I think that is such an important aspect, because you could rack up debt, tech debt or advancement debt in this space in the term of 3 months. So I think that ability to have, that elasticity, that ability to evolve to new demands and changes and everything is super important. And I also think, before I continue, it's 6:50. I know Taylor has to go at 7:15. So here in a couple minutes, we'll get to the Q&A. But before that, I wanted to say that I think a lot of this is also important to have more and more individuals and organizations in this space, because I'm a big fan of that third-party involvement, right? Like our project, Gauss, is very centralized. And a lot of people look at that with, all the negative stigma that exists in this whole decentralized space. But I think that, once we're up and running, we'll end up having something similar to Circle USDC's 30-day treasury audits and things like that. And having third parties that we work with, because having eyes on the outside that are helping within our ecosystem is better. It's part of the reason that we want Sphere & Co. on board to provide some DeFi competition for our own swaps. And I'm going to drop the alpha now, finally, at like the almost hour mark, that it's part of the reason I'm really looking forward to partnering with Obsidian and developing our onboarding and vetting processes. This is something we've spoken about at length, and I think we will continue to speak about at length, and we will continue to refine and define what that process looks like. And I'm really, really looking forward to, Gauss working with you, Taylor, and the rest of the Obsidian team on all of that. So thank you for
Absolutely
all you do.
Yeah, man. I appreciate your trust with the entire process that we'll be working on together through Enterprise by Obsidian. I take this obviously very seriously. So does the rest of the Obsidian team, and we will continue to iterate and improve the process. And I'm excited to implement it with Gauss.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So I know we have a handful of questions, and for all the listeners, sorry for waiting until the hour mark. That really wasn't my intention. I kind of intended to drop it halfway through, but this has been such a great conversation that we've just kind of rolled through almost an hour already. So, yeah, Alex, I'll let you step in and hit the Q&A portion.
Yeah, of course. So I think one of the first questions was a while back. This might be an open question, but app.thor, that is his Discord name, he asked, do you guys know about the Union of Transparency, which is by Loki, Thor, Hive, which is setting up later on this year? To anyone.
Can you read that whole thing again?
Do you guys know about the Union of Transparency by Loki, Thor, and Hive? I guess I'm assuming it's another KYB or KYC processing firm, maybe?
I'm not familiar. Anyone else?
I've heard of them on Twitter. I remember them from back in the Node days. I'm not familiar with that processing, but I've heard of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I've heard of it. I've read a little bit about it, but I don't have an inside look into it. I've been told it's similar to the idea behind Liquid Capital's Circle of Trust, but it's obviously run differently. So that's what I'd say to that.
I think that's more of a yes or no answer, but thank you.
Yeah, I haven't heard of it. On the Circle of Trust, and speaking of Liquid Capital, that's something that we had spoken about the week prior to, all that happened there. And we, Gauss is being very, very cautious and selective of who we partner with. And I think you'll see a lot of a lot of these groups trying to do Circle of Trust, Union of Transparency type things, and I'm not knocking any of them, but I would say that each of those things is probably only as strong as their weakest member, right? And that would be my concern with joining any of those or, being approached. We've been approached by a number of projects, and we're not partnering with tons and tons of people. There'll probably only be 1 or 2% that we'll partner with. And I think, Obsidian has a fairly low acceptance rate at this point. I don't know what it is, but it's not 100% of projects that you guys do the verified by Obsidian, platform with. So I think, yes, they exist. Not familiar with that one specifically. Yeah.
Okay, so we do have another question, and I think this is more towards Taylor. This is by DeFi Panda, and it's more like a two-part question. I'll say the whole thing, and then I'll go through the first part. So DeFi Panda asks, how do you handle a situation where the project owners pay themselves a relatively high salary and justify it as payment for their service while the project fails rather quickly due to negligence or mistakes? And the second part of it is, are the team salaries discussed during the KYC process? And if yes, are they updated with the Obsidian Council when any change is made to the salary structure?
Okay, cool. So I'll answer the first question, which I understand is, what do we do when it comes to how do we handle projects paying themselves salaries? And so in that line of thinking, the principle that we've stuck to from the beginning is, if there's a core team that presents a vision, that sells a community on a vision and asks the community to pitch in monetarily to support that vision, and then they're unable to pull through on that vision, we do not believe that they have provided the service or the product that they sold originally and are not entitled to the money that they otherwise would have been paid for doing that. That's the principle. The hard part, though, is when you actually are in that conversation with a project owner that is saying, actually, I do deserve that because I've spent all this time building it up to this point now. And so this is where I will reference earlier when I was talking about the iterative process, in that earlier today on this call with our legal counsel, I was specifically discussing this question, and I asked in what way we can do that from a legal standpoint, to where how can we work with projects, and if we were to stand in a court of law, how could we argue that they do or do not deserve X amount of money? So to answer your question, right now we are working on solving that exact problem. But up to this point, we have been working with the principle that I explained when I started answering the question. So that's what I would say to that. And then the second part of the question is this discussed as a part of the onboarding process? Is that right?
It's are the team salaries discussed during the KYC process? And
So,
if yes, are they updated with the Obsidian Council when any changes are made to the salary structure?
So up to this point, they have not been. However, one thing that Papa Big Mac, who's my right-hand man, and myself were discussing through this situation was possibilities or ways that we could go about allowing communities to hold the project founders accountable, and also project founders to not be taken advantage of by their upset communities for their work, right? Because that's a balance that we have to, that's a tightrope that we have to walk across. It's not easy to find that point. One solution that we were thinking about is what if, as a part of their white papers, they outlined it in some sort of a checkpoint fashion, where when Y project hits Z goal, then the founder team will receive X payout, right? But something to where it's publicly stated, and it's not hiding behind, in size 3 font at the bottom left of the page, but it's very clear that, similar to a Fiverr milestone system, where if these certain contingencies are met, then the founders do deserve to get paid. Because at the end of the day, they need to pay for their bills in the same way that we all do, and we're all trying to provide for our families in one way or another. And so that was a solution that we were brainstorming as a part of either A, requiring through the Verified by Obsidian process, or hopefully B, a standard that we can set in the space as a whole for projects that are looking to launch. And even if project owners don't necessarily take the initiative to write those out themselves, that the community requires them to do so. I think it's important that the community understands what important boundaries there are to set with project owners, so that everyone can be respected through the process.
I think it's a great question. I just want to chime in for 1 second that, it is important, and it is a fine line that you guys are trying to walk along, because people do need to be compensated for their work, even potentially if that work at the end of a year or whatever span, or a few months, whatever it is, doesn't pan out as everyone had hoped. And I think that having all these conversations, in the sunlight, in the daylight, out of the shadows, is important. I think a lot of millennials and Gen Z see the import of having these conversations as well. I think there's a whole evolution we're watching change, like, across sectors. It's something I think that we, as Gauss, would probably be happy to publicly disclose once we, do start receiving salary. And stuff like that. I think it's a really good topic. I'm glad it's being, discussed, even if it is a very sore point because of something else that's happening right now with another project. But you can go with the next one, Alex.
So we do have a follow-up question by Austin Clark, and you might have kind of touched up on this as well. But he asked, how do you justify someone claiming something as team pay versus straight-up theft? Given that if someone could run away with an outlandish team pay to cover the subject view of pay by itself. So this might be a question for, well, I guess Zach can also touch up on it too. But this seems like a question for Taylor as well, or for anyone else.
Yeah, these are all orbiting the current liquid capital. I mean, I'm peripherally aware of that situation and what is like publicly. The information's out there in the public if you go into various discords and look at their announcements. But
Does anyone have any thoughts on this before I speak on it? Because I definitely would love to hear from Zach or Arsh if you guys have any thoughts that initially come to your mind.
Yeah, definitely. The way I see it is that I think it makes the most sense if team pay and everything that goes into that is clearly stated before everything goes down. And before there's a pre-sale, before the token launches, whatever the case may be, I think if it's clearly stated beforehand, like, okay, we reach X amount of market cap, or we launch a pre-sale with this amount raised, or whatever criteria is set, and then once that criteria is met, and then it's kind of like agreed upon, like this is in the white paper, it's clear to everybody that cares to read the white paper, right? Then it's kind of agreed upon, and there's no questions asked. So then when something like Liquid Capital goes on, that's a little unclear because they didn't have those preset expectations. So maybe Taylor, I know you would probably have a lot more to talk about, given that you're so involved in that situation. But
I think
that's just the way I see it.
I think Arsh unmuted himself to chime in as well.
I think the quick little thing that I want to touch on is like, you can't pick and choose transparency, right? It's the aspect of you are transparent or you are not. It's not like when it's applicable. It has to be applicable always, or you can't hold yourself to that. And I think when it comes down to core teams taking pay, I don't think of it as anything different.
Right. Or like token allocations or equity, they're all part of that same compensation conversation. And I think that can be done publicly. I think that it's also important that perhaps in this public conversation, there be a recognition of different skill sets, right? Like we have some members of our team who aren't on board full time because, they have their other endeavors right now. And to compensate them fairly or adequately to bring them on full time is more than I think most people would be typically accustomed to, right? And I know Pat's here in the audience, but Pat has 30 years as C-suite executive, as a CFO. That's not a year or two of experience. That's a whole different scale, right? But I'll let you go on now, Taylor.
Yeah, I'm on board with what everyone has said so far. The only additional thing that I would add is I think the idea of having that type of discussion may initially cause new project owners to cringe or to flinch or to think something massively negative could happen through that process, or that they would somehow be shut down. But I honestly believe that it would really free up a lot of the concern and the stress that would otherwise come to an individual that's building their project, because they would know that they are operating in the clear in a relationship that they directly have with their community that is allowing them to accomplish certain tasks for certain monetary compensation, and that the community would also feel comfortable too paying that out as both sides of the agreement are met. And I think that is where a lot of heartache comes from as well, is that oftentimes the expectation that is set is very one-sided. It's, we are going to do this, this, and this, and this. Do you want to come along for the ride? Right? But there's no conversation that I've seen that's been very public about, we're going to do this, this, and this. Do you want to come along for the ride? And are you willing in the process to support me financially to be able to hit these goals, right? And if so, these are the specifics. We can either vote on it, we can negotiate, whatever, but it has to be done in a public setting. But it's an idea that I'm optimistic and hopeful about, that I would love to see implemented, but I think that would just require both project owners and communities to take it and run with it and actually make an effort to implement it.
I agree.
So-
I'm looking forward to seeing how it evolves. I think we have one more question.
Yes, I think we do have one more, but I think this was before Gary announced a partnership with Obsidian. But there's a guy named Sporkman on Discord. He says, "How will Obsidian 100 Days, Cardinal, and the rest here to be involved with Gauss? Will they help bring products to the chain for that real-world relationship building?"
So obviously, I'll tackle this one to start. We're not officially partnered with 100 Days or Cardinal. I do think there's opportunity for us to work together in various ways. Like I said, I even put Arsh on the spot earlier with that. What was the second part? Will they help bring? I think we're all doing that in this space. We're all helping bring real world utility. That is accountability is a utility into this space. And it's all building toward mass adoption. So what will those look like in the future with them or other partners? I'm not sure. But the purpose of these fireside chats isn't just, it's not to have announcements or hint at some alpha or something. It's to have these great conversations with the public, with people that I think have a lot to say or are experts in this field or in that topic. That's the purpose of these fireside chats. And that's what we've had for the last hour and change. And it's been amazing. Taylor, I saw you come off mute.
Oh, I didn't know if I needed to clarify what we're doing with you or not. And I realized that in that little banner you posted, there was a little explanation of it. But I thought that his question was related specifically to how we were assisting Gauss. But maybe I misunderstood. So that was
I
the
think
night.
his question was made before we even announced that, before we dropped that little bombshell.
Okay. Cool.
But yeah, to clarify our relationship with Obsidian, we're working together for part of our onboarding process. It's not going to be the entire thing. We will likely have some in-house portion first before we pass them on to Obsidian for, I believe you're calling it Enterprise.
Yes. I would love the opportunity to give a 30-second overview so it's
Please do.
Hopefully clear. So Enterprise by Obsidian is a third-party augmentation to other projects, platforms, or products. It's specifically vague so that it can be customizable to each platform or project's product that is needed. So in this case, with Gauss, Gary approached me and said, "Hey, I'm looking to bring people into the Gauss ecosystem to build on this layer 1 blockchain. However, I want to make sure that each of the individuals that builds on our blockchain is KYC'd." And I said, "That's awesome." And excuse me, I'm sorry, that's muscle memory there. KYB'd, that their identities are managed well. And I said, "Yes, sir, yes, sir." And so now at this point in time, we are currently in a collaborative discussion about what that exactly looks like based off of his vision for Gauss in the future. And we, as Obsidian, leverage our existing KYB processes to integrate them into the Enterprise by Obsidian clients' platforms or products. So that's what Enterprise by Obsidian is.
Yeah, and I think it's important to work with third parties, like I've said earlier, for a lot of this, for that identity management. We could spin up a team in-house to do some of what they're doing. We could reinvent the wheel, but why? Obsidian's already doing so many things the right way, and they're learning and executing and evolving and iterating so rapidly in this space that, it wouldn't, it doesn't make sense, but I'd rather have somebody else outside of Gauss working with us to handle a lot of this. There's also a ton of liability that they're having to work with as well. That whole identity management aspect and the informational security that comes with it. That's a whole separate, potential barrel of monkeys that I'm glad we're working with somebody else to handle.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
I think that was our last question, though. Arsh, Cardinal, did you guys... Arsh, Zach, sorry, not just Cardinal. Did either of you have anything you wanted to interject in closing?
No, I think that everything was wrapped up well. The only thing I would add is the aspect of like, sometimes being the leader is the aspect of like knowing what you're good at and kind of knowing what you're not. And if someone is doing something in the right processing, they're innovating and they're boiling down so quickly, it's the aspect of kind of relying on that leadership and that aspect, the quality of understanding that someone is doing something right and kind of coming off the heels of that instead of having to take that on yourself. It allows you to focus in your more passionate areas and your areas of expertise at a greater level.
Agreed, 100% on that one.
Totally on board.
Zach, you unmuted?
Yeah, I think you guys covered it very well. The last thing I'd like to ask is specifically to Arsh. I'm still looking for an apology. I mean, you've beat me like 10 times now in chess, and I mean, you're just embarrassing me, and I just haven't gotten an apology yet.
Listen. It is all a game of fun here, Zach, and you have gotten me. I think once. Maybe.
I don't think so.
It'll happen. It will definitely happen in time.
Wait, so you're
Sounds
asking
good.
him to apologize for beating you at chess?
Yeah, I'm just messing around.
Either you play Othello, and I know you have to leave, Taylor, so I greatly appreciate you taking the time to join us in this conversation, and I'm
Thank
glad
you.
we were able to have it for the public.
Yeah, this was a good talk. You guys are good people. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to actually dive into this topic, because it's one of those, in my opinion, it's one of the more boring things, but it's also one of the more important aspects of crypto that I think is really important to dial in. So glad you're all here.
Agreed. I look forward to playing chess and/or Go with Arsh and Zach at some point. Let me know when that's happening, and I'll join in. I think Austin is still in our audience. Not Austin Clark, but Austin McCall, our Austin. I think he's a chess player as well. So looking forward to that one in the future.
Let's do it. Sounds like fun.
Always down for a good game.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this fireside chat. Thank you, Alex, for handling the Q&A and intros and our music at the beginning and uploading it to YouTube soon. And thank you to our audience and all the future listeners for listening in. Everyone have a great day.
Thank
You
guys.
too. See you, Gary. See you, everyone.
You too.
Look at that sweet, sweet music on the way out.
Defeated. Trying to get that right. All right. So yeah, we're gonna end this stream, and then we're gonna get this up on YouTube shortly afterwards. So I'm gonna give it around maybe 3 minutes, and we're gonna close the stage and also this chat as well. But yet again, thank you everyone for joining, and hopefully we'll see you guys next time.